ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
A lot of people have been throwing the B word around lately.
The entire AI industry is a bubble primed to burst.
In July 2025, tech companies' share of the S&P 500 reached its highest level since the dot-com bubble 25 years ago, and that really didn't go very well.
The Nasdaq index falling more than 200 points.
So what happened last time, and what can it tell us about what's going on with AI today? I'm Matt Bevan, and on my show, if you're listening, we give you the backstories behind the big stories.
They're a cheaper and convenient alternative to driving a car, but some e-bike riders are causing massive headaches for other road users and police. A string of serious injuries and deaths in e-bike crashes, particularly among children, is fueling calls for a crackdown across the country. Today, Geoff Rose from the Monash Institute of Transport Studies on the influx of illegal e-bikes on the roads and what can be done about it. I'm Sydney Peed. On Gadigal Land, Sydney, this is ABC News Daily. Geoff, e-bikes are everywhere these days. You really can't walk through the city and even the suburbs without seeing them. And they've brought a lot of benefits, right, in getting people from A to B without working up a sweat.
That's true. And they benefit people of a range of ages. Commuters that want to get to work without needing a shower. People that enjoy going out for recreational rides but aren't able to have the stamina that they once used to. And older riders who may be limited by health or joint issues that detracts from their ability to ride and get enjoyment.
But Geoff, since this boom, we've seen so many e-bike related accidents. There's been a real spike in injuries and deaths.
Emergency rooms are recording high numbers of patients with e-bike and e-scooter injuries.
8-year-old Zeke Hondo died when his e-bike collided with another along this footpath on the Sunshine Coast.
Over the past week, 2 children have died in e-bike-related incidents in Queensland.
A man was killed when he collided with a 14-year-old boy riding an e-bike on the New South Wales Central Coast, and a teenager has been charged with manslaughter after a pedestrian was killed in Perth.
And a lot of them are just kids, Geoff.
In a number of instances, it's young people riding non-compliant devices that are capable of very high speed. And when I say high speed, I'm meaning around 90 kilometres per hour. And in those situations, particularly where they're not wearing a helmet, there's a risk of serious injury, and sadly, we've seen a number of fatalities.
Yeah, even just over the weekend, I was looking at some reporting out of Queensland, and on Friday or Saturday night, there was sort of 13 e-bike related accidents just in a night, you know. So it's really a lot of people being injured on these vehicles.
They are, although we've probably got to be a little bit cautious about the term. We use the phrase generically e-bike, but in fact, some of those devices that particularly young guys are riding are more like an e-motorbike. They're masquerading as an e-bike, but in fact the speed profile is closer to that of a motorbike.
Let's unpack these issues a little bit more. We'll start with these non-compliant bikes. We've seen, as you say, these really powerful e-bikes, which you can buy online, flood into the streets, and many of them don't comply with the national e-bike standards in Australia. Just explain to me what we've been seeing over the last few years.
The Australian regulations were framed consistent with the European regulations, where to get power assistance, you had to be pedalling, and the power assistance had to cut off at 25 kilometres per hour. There was a change in the way that the federal government had administered the import rules in 2021, and that made it easier for people to bring in non-compliant vehicles. There is a small challenge here in that anyone's entitled to ride what they like on private property. So importers can legally bring in high-speed vehicles that people might use on a farm or on private property. The problem is that they're often marketed as something that can be used on the road network and on bike paths. And that's where we get the problem with very, very high-speed riding that creates a risk to the user and a risk to other people on that facility.
And these fat tyre bikes have become really popular with young people, right? They've got throttles, you don't have to pedal. As you say, they almost look like a motorbike. And they're very different, right, from the shared e-bikes you can use in some cities that anyone can rent.
Correct. And using those shared e-bikes as a reference point, to my knowledge, every one of them is a compliant device, because the operators couldn't risk running a non-compliant device out there with the liability that that would have associated with it. So they're compliant devices. You have to be pedalling to get the power assistance. There is no throttle to operate at high speed, and the power assistance cuts out at 25 kilometres per hour. With the shared devices, we see other issues with street clutter, them falling over on footpaths, and even though they're limited to 25 kilometres per hour, riders can still ride them irresponsibly when a responsible speed would be lower than 25 kilometres per hour.
Another complaint you often hear is the flood of food delivery drivers, right? They're often on the footpaths, and those e-bikes all seem to have throttles, and the riders are really in a hurry. They're sort of incentivised to be riding fast, right?
They are. And although it's not the case for every one of them, in many instances they're leased or they've purchased them through a company so that they can then get the job as a gig rider delivering food. We recently completed a study for the VACC in Victoria, and I mentioned before that to be compliant you have to pedal to get the power assistance. We observed e-bike delivery vehicles in central Melbourne, and only 4% of them were pedalling at any speed, and that was only 3% of them pedalling above 25 kilometres per hour, which is supposed to be the legal limit, and we observed one travelling as fast as 54 kilometres per hour.
Yeah, right. They're really whipping through the city. And the other issue, Geoff, is a lot of these bikes, they're really easy to hack. You can modify them to go faster, which is a huge issue as well.
So with a number of these devices, the control system is controlled through an app, and the user can go into the app and adjust some of the settings. And you can change the maximum speed at which the device will travel. And it may be that when you roll the bike out of the bike shop, it's limited to 25 kilometres per hour. But the fact that you can then go and change that to a higher speed means that all of a sudden you've got a non-compliant device. Europe has a provision around anti-tampering, which is the requirement today that to sell into the European market, the manufacturer has to confirm that the user cannot reconfigure the controller.
Well, we've just seen the federal government take some action on this. It's going to raise the e-bike import standard to the stronger European standard by the end of the year. That change is also supposed to crack down on people's ability to modify these bikes. What kind of impact do you think that will have?
I think it's going to stem the flow, and that's a good thing. We've still got a number of non-compliant devices, and coming up to Christmas, people will probably be getting some of these devices for their kids. And I think parents need to think long and hard about what sort of device they get for their child, because there's been too many instances recently where parents have featured in TV programs, sadly, to talk about the death of one of their kids.
And Geoff, when it comes to regulating e-bikes, it's mostly up to the individual states, but that's a bit messy, right? Because it really varies across the board.
Look, it does, and there are differences in the rules across states. You mentioned before riding on footpaths. Some states that's legal, some states it's not. There is a piece of work going on that's being led by the West Australian Transport Minister at the moment to have a look at our regulatory framework and come back and see, do we really need a different category for this other type of e-bike? Because we've got a lot of them out there at the moment. I take a bit of interest in what the approach that Queensland took in this space. When they made e-scooters legal, they changed their approach and said, we're not going to worry about the power of the motor, we're going to focus on the speed at which it's operated. And that's in line with the way we regulate motor vehicles. We don't say you can't go and buy a Ferrari. You can buy the Ferrari, but if you go over the speed limit, you'll get a speeding ticket. And what Queensland did was they specified a speed limit on different sorts of facilities, shared paths, bike lanes. And the police can then go out with a radar gun, and it doesn't matter whether you're riding a conventional bike, an e-bike or an e-scooter. If you're over the speed, you can get a speeding ticket. It's not a perfect solution because some of these vehicles are so high speed that the police are reluctant to go into a pursuit chase because of the other risks. So it's not an overnight solution, but I think that would help to improve the safety on our non-motorised transport facilities and bike paths.
Okay, because a lot of these rule differences in between the states, there's a focus on how much power the e-bike can have.
Yes.
For example, in New South Wales at the moment, you can have a bike with up to 500 watts of power in the motor, but there's sort of this focus on the power of the engine, right?
Yes, it is, although New South Wales has just recently announced that they're going to go back to the 250 figure that the other states have adopted.
New South Wales at the moment is the only jurisdiction that allows the sale of 500-watt e-bikes, and Premier Chris Minns says that will be changed with a new 250-watt power limit imposed.
I don't want to put young people's lives at risk because they're travelling down a road on what is no longer a bicycle, it's now a motorbike. That's dangerous for kids, it's dangerous for motorists, and something's got to give here.
But you're 100% right about the focus on the power. The challenge with that is that it is impossible for police to be able to test the power of the device in the field. It's just not possible, and it becomes messy for them administratively to have to try and impound a vehicle and get it tested. That's what I like about the Queensland approach.
Okay, Geoff. Well, there are plenty of road safety rules that already exist. You know, non-compliant e-bikes are illegal on public roads. No one should be riding a bike without a helmet. But it seems hugely difficult to police. Why is it so hard?
I think some riders perceive that it's a fairly low-risk activity. And this goes for even when they're riding at very high speed. And partly that's a lot of young males that don't accurately perceive the risks of activities they undertake or look to get a degree of risk. I think it's going to require a broader community education campaign as well to make people aware of some of the risks and continued police presence to try and ensure that we minimise the amount of irresponsible riding.
What about some of these fat bikes and getting them off the roads? Do you think we're going to see some states start confiscating these bikes from kids and riders?
There is a real chance of that, and I think that's something that parents should have in mind if they're thinking of buying one of these for one of their kids at Christmas. That there is a risk that as police step up these activities, they will impound other devices and get them tested. And then there's a risk that the bike will be gone because the rider risks being charged with being unlicensed and riding an unregisterable device.
And what about that? Some people think that you should have to have a license or be a minimum age to ride an e-bike, kind of like a motorbike. Do you think that would be useful?
If the device has got the performance of a motorbike, then I certainly support needing a license. When e-bikes were developed and the compliant e-bikes came along, the notion there is that it's supplementing the rider, but it's got similar characteristics to a person riding a push bike. And we don't require a license to ride a push bike. So I don't believe that we need to go down the path of a license to ride an e-bike. But where somebody's on a device that's capable of high speed, then I think there is a need to see that they're treated comparably to people that are riding motor scooters and motorbikes. And at the moment, that's a very unlevel playing field.
And I suppose, Geoff, on the flip side of that is we don't want to totally discourage people from taking up e-bikes. Is there a danger of over-regulating and Australians missing out on the benefits of this sort of green, active transport?
I think more Australians are likely to engage in the use of these green transport modes when they know that it's a safe way to travel. And at the moment, these high-speed devices out there increase risks to other users. And so I think keeping focused on the European standard, and then we need some enforceable rules that police can be out around the cities easily enforcing people who are riding irresponsibly in the same way that we manage the road system. Doesn't mean that it's perfect. We've still got irresponsible riders, but it's about trying to minimise the extent of that. And I think that would make the whole network safer for users and non-users.
Geoff Rose is an adjunct professor in transport engineering at Monash University. This episode was produced by Cinnamon Nippard, audio production by Sam Dunn. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sydney Peed. ABC News Daily will be back again tomorrow. Thanks for listening.